Hi, my name is Kristen Schwartz Jones, and I'm an attorney in Pasadena with DBS Law Group. Our firm focuses on conservatorships and special needs planning and government benefits. They all kind of go hand in hand. And today, I am so honored to be with you all from Club 21, and I am going to provide an introduction to special needs planning. And so the focus of our conversation today will really be on third-party special needs trust, but we'll go over what the whole overview is for special needs trust, as well as some other planning tools that often come up while we're engaging in special needs planning. So what is a special needs trust? When we look at special needs trusts, we're really focused on a vehicle that not only protects assets for an individual, but also something that preserves the government benefits. And these are for individuals who have been diagnosed and meet the definition of somebody who is disabled as it's provided by public benefits. So when we look at public benefits, ones that we're really looking for are the means-tested ones when we're considering special needs planning. So that would include SSI, which is through the Social Security Administration, that's supplemental security income. And then we also look to Medi-Cal, both traditional and expanded Medi-Cal. There are other public benefits that we look to as we're considering this planning process. One is SSDI, which is disability income, as well as Medicare. Sometimes Section 8 comes up, as well as veterans benefits. For the entitlement programs, such as disability income and Medicare, it's not that we don't consider special needs planning, but it's sometimes not as important if those are the sole benefits because they are not a means-tested one. However, they do come up if we have an individual who maybe can't manage funds, whether they do not have the capacity to do so, or they're susceptible to fraud or undue influence, that some type of long-term planning like this may be a really great option for them. But today we're really focused on the means-based benefits such as SSI and Medi-Cal. So why doesn't a special needs trust count for public benefits? The main reason is that for the beneficiary, these assets are taken out of their custody and control. So the beneficiary cannot be the trustee. He or she cannot have direct access to these funds, cannot direct how funds are spent. The beneficiary can say to the trustee, I would like to have this therapy, or I think something could be beneficial, but it has to be at the trustee's discretion how these funds are spent, and vendors are paid directly. So money is not given directly to the beneficiary. So as long as that we can show that the beneficiary is not in control of or in custody of the funds or assets, then that's one of the main things to show that they should not negatively impact and count as a resource for whether it be Social Security or Medi-Cal. The other piece of this is that for what the trustee can spend, there are some restrictions. When we look at Social Security, such as SSI benefits, these benefits are for food and shelter. So normally we do not have the special needs trust contribute to those funds. Sometimes it makes sense. SSI provides modest funds, which are wonderful, but sometimes don't truly cover the cost of living. So the trustee may need to weigh the pros and cons of having benefits depleted so that they can use the trust funds to contribute to food and shelter if it's necessary, or maybe just stick with the benefits and truly have the special needs trust as a supplemental source, which is really what it's meant to be. The third prong that Medi-Cal and Social Security look at is that the trust was created appropriately. Did the appropriate person create the trust? Did it include the provisions that it needs to? When we look at the types of trusts, which will be in our next slide, certain trusts, such as the first-party special needs trust, needs to have a payback provision, which says that at the beneficiary's passing, any excess funds need to go back to pay to the state for any services provided. This is different than a third-party special needs trust, which does not need to include that type of provision. So let's take a look at the types of trust that we can create for a special needs trust. So one is the first party special needs trust, and that trust is kind of what it sounds like. It is the funds of the beneficiary, so whether they receive them as a direct inheritance or they receive them from a settlement, these are funds that the beneficiary has come into possession of and now needs to decide whether or not he or she can create her own trust or needs to look to another individual to have the court create a trust for him or her. Another option is a pooled trust. And with a pooled trust, this is something that a nonprofit would manage. So you would, as it sounds, you would have your money pooled with other individuals, and the nonprofit would be on a sliding scale for fees, and the interest rate would be great because you're working with a larger group of funds. We see this come into play in two different instances. One is if the amount of funding there is for the special needs trust is modest, and it makes sense to have it be part of a pool trust instead of going through the expense of creating a special needs trust. A special needs trust can cost upward of $4,000, $6,000, $8,000. I've seen it cost as much as $12,000. They're very tailored, very specific, and they definitely can run a little bit high for estate planning. So sometimes a pool trust is a great option. And also, if an individual does not necessarily have somebody that can create the trust for them, if they can't do it on their own, or perhaps they do have the capacity to create a trust, but they don't know who should serve as a trustee and they need a nonprofit to step in, this is a great resource for them to do that. The third type of trust, which is the one that we're going to spend the most time on today, is a third-party special needs trust. And this is using the funds of another individual. So it's like a gift or a donation, however you want to think about it, but it's the funds of another individual that create this trust for the benefit of the beneficiary. So for example, you could have parents create a special needs trust for their child, and that would be a third-party special needs trust because their funds would directly fund this trust. Unlike a first-party special needs trust where the beneficiary has already come into possession of funds and is now funding the special needs trust. One of the biggest differences between a first-party and a third-party trust is that there are payback provisions for a first-party trust. For a first-party trust, where either the beneficiary creates it or it is court-created, there are payback provisions for the state so that if there are excess funds left, the state will recoup those funds for services provided up to the amount that either services were provided as they are limited to the funds that are actually in the trust estate. The great thing about a third-party special needs trust is that these funds do not have a payback provision. So once the beneficiary passes, if there are excess funds, the creators of the trust can name contingent beneficiaries to receive those funds following the beneficiary's passing. There are a few considerations when you're speaking with your lawyer about drafting a special needs trust. The first one that is incredibly important is that if you happen to fund a special needs trust with a retirement account, it needs to be tailored differently. There are different provisions and significantly more language about how these trusts are dealt with, how taxes are dealt with for them, and you need to make sure that you have somebody familiar with dealing where a retirement account is going to fund a special needs trust because it's not your normal special needs trust. Another consideration that we're going to delve into later in the presentation is who is the best person to serve as trustee and what type of expertise do they need to have, and does it ever make sense to consider a professional to act in this role as trustee as opposed to a family member or friend. Remember, the beneficiary can never act as trustee of this trust. That's one of the most important points of making sure that this does not count for government benefits. As I mentioned, if it's a third-party special needs trust, we're looking at there not being a payback provision. So that is a great way to pre-plan if you know that you have an individual in your family that that would inherit from you, to create this trust on the front end is a wonderful option, so that then you can also name contingent beneficiaries, and the trust is done once it would be time for them to inherit, rather than them trying to either create it themselves or going through a court system to do that, which is not it's a great option if the court system is your only option. We have an amazing community of attorneys in this area, and our LA courts are really sensitive to these issues, but it's a lot of time and it's a lot of money, and there's continued court oversight when you do it that way. So if there is the possibility of doing some of this planning on the front end, which is what we're going to focus on today with third-party special needs trust, it really, really is a great option for your loved ones. If you are planning for somebody who would benefit from a special needs trust, whether they are currently receiving government benefits or you find that they likely will receive government benefits in the future, then you have two options of how you create the special needs trust. One, and this is both for third-party trusts, one is that you have a standalone trust, and so it is a separate document just for the beneficiary, where you have it tailored to their needs, and you have your trustee succession, and depending on if you have a family member or if you elect to have a professional serve in that capacity as trustee, maybe you consider a trust advisory committee, you really can make this trust very specific to the beneficiary. The other upside of this is that if you're going to need to give this trust to government entities such as Medi-Cal or Social Security, it's a little bit easier to deal with a single trust document than dealing with a subtrust of a document, which is your other option. So instead of creating a subtrust, instead of creating the standalone trust within someone's revocable living trust, I almost feel like I need a diagram for this. Within someone's revocable living trust, you can have a generic subtrust that is a special needs trust. And what it would say is that if a beneficiary would benefit from a special needs trust, then this special needs trust that is embedded within your estate plan, that is a subtrust of your estate plan, it can be funded so that the individual can maintain benefits or preserve eligibility for benefits. There's no problem with government entities dealing with either type of planning, but what I've found is that it's easier to present a standalone where you don't have to dig to find the trust and try to interpret other things. We handle a lot of appeals in our office, both for Medi-Cal and Social Security, and we find that it's definitely been easier when we have a single document to present. However, again, both documents work just as well if that's a concern. What I do like about the standalone trust, though, is that you can really tailor it if you know that your beneficiary would benefit from that. So what we see with a lot of families, which I think is probably the audience that I'm speaking to today, where you have a son or a daughter or other loved one, and you know that they're going to benefit from this type of trust, and you have a vision for the type of care needs that they're going to have, or the quality of life that you'd like them to have, then you can have a standalone trust that really details all of that and preserves what your wishes are for them and for how you would like your funds managed. So as you can see, this is truly a holistic approach. It's not just drafting the trust, but it's also considering what the family's vision is. Again, this is really focused on a third-party special needs trust. So we're thinking of, for the sake of argument, in our conversation today, if we have parents who have a child and a special needs trust would be beneficial, then we're looking at what's their vision for their funding for this trust for their child. Do they have the capability, and do they want to provide for some type of housing? Do they want to have the family home maintained for their child later in life, and make sure that there are funds for caregivers? Maybe we're looking at adaptive cars so that a caregiver or the individual can drive. Maybe there are educational resources, recreational resources, therapies that would be important. Maybe the child is really benefits from equine therapy. I mean, the options are endless, but what I love is that the family can really have this vision and make it as specific as they want it to be within this document. So part of this is the family vision and what would most enhance the quality of life for the beneficiary. And then obviously we want these funds to grow. We want them to be available for a lifetime to supplement needs for whatever Medi-Cal or Social Security does not provide for. So we're working with a financial planner. We're working with a really good accountant who is familiar with the tax ramifications of special needs trust, as well as other planning tools for special needs, such as an ABLE account, which we're going to talk about in just a little bit. We also really look to care managers. What are the current needs of the beneficiary? What are the projected needs of the beneficiary? Does that change how we manage money? Do we have an annuity from the special needs trust, which I always have some hesitation with. Sometimes it's a great vehicle, but you need a financial planner that can really advise on all of these issues so that your funds and your special needs trust continue to grow for your loved one really throughout their lifetime or as long as possible. So what does your roundtable approach look like? This is just an example of some key players that I really like to include. Obviously family members, because you're probably the ones creating this and you know your loved one better than anybody else, and you want to make sure that they have the quality of life that you'd like them to have, and you know what their interests are and comfort levels are. So your vision is so important as part of this. Obviously, you have us, you have the lawyers who are going to draft everything and advise you on other planning options. Maybe there's something in conjunction with the special needs trust that would be a great option, such as the ABLE account that we're going to talk about. And a TrueLink card is another option. Both things we'll catch at the end of this presentation, but you want to also be made aware of if the laws are changing so that government eligibility is consistently maintained, and that's what you'd be looking to your lawyers to provide. As we discussed, the care manager, medical professionals, we need to know what the care needs are. Should we have an evaluation and an assessment now? You're probably doing a lot of this through the regional center with your loved ones, and you're perhaps in IEPs, figuring out what the availability of resources are and what really best suits your son or daughter, or whoever is in your life that you're really planning for. I cannot stress enough, have an accountant and financial planner who are truly familiar with special needs planning, because there are a lot of different intricacies with this, and you need to have somebody sensitive to these needs and can advise you on them and knows the ins and outs of all of this planning. The one area that we find really takes the longest is who's the trustee going to be. And oftentimes we see a family come in and it's the parents who will create this trust and they will serve as the initial trustees. And then the big question is, what happens when neither one of them can serve anymore? So sometimes it makes sense for, if there's a sibling, to step in. What we find is that although it is a tremendous labor of love that a sibling would love to provide, it's a lot. So we look to if there are other individuals within your community of support, or perhaps a professional fiduciary that could also fill this role. And I've just listed here some ideas that you'll want to consider as you're thinking about who would be your trustee. Do they have the resources? Do they know your loved one well enough? Will they be available to do all this? Do they have the time, the expertise? Is there a conflict of interest? All important questions to ask yourself. If you find that you're going along the route of considering a professional fiduciary, one really great option that I like to discuss is a trust advisory committee. And the trust advisory committee, I usually say 3 to 5 is the sweet spot for how many people you would want as part of this, because you need an odd number in case you need to vote. That's the easiest way to handle it, as opposed to having a tiebreaker. And the trust advisory committee could be in place whether it's a family member as trustee or a fiduciary as trustee. But what they can do is they could simply be an advisory committee, and the trustee could go to them if there are questions about, what type of therapies do you recommend? Do you think I'm carrying out the family's vision? What would the beneficiary most benefit from? The advisory committee also can provide a level of oversight. So maybe there are expenses that come up and you want to say, if it's going to be over $5,000 or over $10,000, then you need the advisory committee's buy-in before the trustee makes a purchase or has a cost like that. Or maybe it's even a little bit more far-reaching, where you would need the advisory committee to come into play if there was real property to be purchased. You really can tailor this to how you want it. The other thing you can consider is that for annual accounting, what the trustee would provide, the advisory committee could receive this so that there is that ongoing oversight to make sure that funds are managed appropriately. Again, I see this more often if it's a fiduciary serving in this role, not as much when it's a family member, but depending on the family dynamic, this could be a really great tool as well. Sometimes if a friend serves as a fiduciary, this is also a nice tool. Another provision that I would recommend considering is a trust protector. A trust protector can act in 3 instances. One is if there's a change in the law, because remember, this is an irrevocable trust, so it really can't be changed. And if it needs to be changed, you're going to need to seek court approval. So if there's a change in the law that would require the trust to be amended so that the beneficiary could continue to receive government benefits, then we want to make sure that the trust continues to not be a resource so that benefits are not negatively impacted. If this occurs, the trust protector could amend the trust in this solo instance. The other way the trust protector would act is if there's some type of trustee malfeasance. So if the trustee was mismanaging funds or not addressing property needs, not adequately addressing the needs of the beneficiary, then the trust protector could remove the trustee if there was cause. Lastly, and I'm sure this would never happen with our office, but if there was ever an error in the trust, a Scribner's error where the intent was so clear, but there was a clear error, the trust protector could go in and change the trust to correct that error. So those are the 3 instances that you would have a trust protector act. When we look at a special needs trust, there are often other planning tools that we'll discuss in conjunction with it. One is an ABLE account. And this is a great resource, especially if you have somebody who will qualify for a special needs trust, but is high functioning and would like to maintain some independence. The qualifications for this is that there needs to be a diagnosed disability before the age of 26. And then you're able to open up this ABLE account, which really acts kind of like a checking account. And the beneficiary can directly put in and withdraw funds from it. There is a $15,000 cap annually. And then for California, along with many other states, there is a $100,000 cap over time. This is similar to a first-party special needs trust in the sense that it also has a payback provision. And if there are an excess of funds at the beneficiary's passing, the recovery would occur first for the state before it would go anywhere else. Those are just some additional information on this. These are all on your handouts that you can look through. Another tool that I like to include is a TrueLink card. This is like a credit card, but it is specifically designed for somebody who is accessing government benefits or could access government benefits, because it places limitations on what expenses can be paid for by the card. So the beneficiary could have this card. It could be preloaded. We want to be careful about, what funds are being used on it so that there wasn't some type of in-kind support that it could defer the type of Social Security or Medi-Cal benefits being received. But what's really great about this is that the trustee would be able to see in real time what the expenses were and either approve or not approve the expenses so that there would be that level of oversight. So even though the beneficiary would have the independence of using the card, the trustee could monitor it and make sure that there was not an expense that would ever negatively impact benefits. Oftentimes when we are discussing a special needs trust, conservatorships come up in tandem with it. And what we find is that there are a handful of families where they have a loved one and don't really have an issue with working with doctors or hospitals or other healthcare professionals without having the court order for a conservatorship or having the individual name somebody as an agent through a healthcare directive. However, if it's necessary, there are two types of conservatorship. One is of the person, so that's medical needs, and it can also include residential preference. If you have somebody who is developmentally disabled, it could also limit civil liberties as well. So it's a really important thing as we look at conservatorship. The other part of a conservatorship is one of the estate. Our discussion today really focused on where the individual's estate is really within that trust estate with a third-party trust. However, if we had a first-party trust and the beneficiary did not have the capacity to create one, then we would be looking at a court-created trust, and we would need to appoint a conservator of the estate, usually for the sole purpose of just asking authority to create that first-party special needs trust. Again, that trust would be court supervised. It would have ongoing oversight by the court, and you would have to be bonded. There are other restrictions and considerations that would come with that. But as I mentioned, we have an amazing community of attorneys in the area, and our courts are just excellent with these situations. If you have somebody who is able to make decisions, there are different levels of capacity with making these decisions, whether it be for a healthcare directive, where we're looking at testamentary capacity, which when we look at the scale of capacity tests, testamentary is at towards the bottom of it. When we look at a power of attorney, the capacity level needed, that's the highest, it's contractual capacity. So if somebody is creating a special needs trust, we also, before we consider the conservatorship, we look to see what is the level of capacity. Should we be considering an advanced healthcare directive as well? Is there the possibility of a power of attorney so that we can keep things outside of court? These are two other really good planning tools. If you're able to have a physician declaration confirm that your loved one is in fact able to make these decisions. And I don't need to tell any of you about this, but another amazing tool is nonprofit assistance. You are all part of one of the best nonprofits in the area with Club 21, and I can't say enough good things about it. But Club 21, among others, offer referral services, resources, advice, guidance, speaker series like this. Sometimes there is funding available through the nonprofit. So I encourage you to inquire within Club 21. You're really part of an amazing group. So nonprofit assistance is also another possibility as you're looking at all these options. So this is everything that we talked about today. It's definitely a bit of a map. Towards the left of your screen, you're going to see the brief discussion on conservatorships and how that trickles down. Our main discussion today really focused on the right side of this table, where we're looking at special needs trusts, where they are a third-party trust created using the funds of somebody else, such as somebody's parents or another family member or friend, and they are held in trust for the benefit of another individual who qualifies as having a disability per the Social Security and Medi-Cal standards. So keep in mind, beneficiary cannot be the trustee, cannot have care or control of these funds. This is all trustee managed. And the great part about the third-party trust is that there is not a payback provision for those. So it's unlike the first-party special needs trust that we spoke about early on, where that would have a payback provision at the beneficiary's passing, and everything that the state would be able to recover would go first up to the amount that's in the trust, capped at the amount that services were provided, where the third-party trust does not have that. It really preserves the funds that are in there. So thank you so much for having me today. It was such an honor to speak to all of you and be part of your Club 21 Speakers series. I am including my phone number and my email address at the bottom, so please don't hesitate to contact me if you have any questions after today's presentation, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to all of you. Thank you.